The first siren of the morning was the coffee machine. It rattled in the corner of the residence lounge, filling the air with the sharp smell of cheap beans and burnt plastic. Dr. Evelyn Mercer stood in front of it, hair pulled into a rough knot, badge clipped crooked to her scrubs. The clock above the door read 5:12 a.m. Pacific Mercy Medical Center was already awake. Through the narrow window, she could see the outline of the San Diego Bay, a dark sheet just beginning to catch pale light. The hospital sat high above it, glass and concrete and steel. Somewhere above her on the rooftop, the helipad light still glowed faint green. Her pager vibrated. She picked up the coffee without tasting it and stepped into the hallway. The corridor outside was all white tile and humming vents. Nurses rolled portable computers like luggage. A respiratory therapist walked past mask hanging at his neck, nodding a tired hello. Eve nodded back. Two nurses near the charge desk glanced up when she approached. "Morning," she said. The older one with cropped gray hair and a badge that said Marcy gave her a warm, automatic smile. "Morning, Dr. Mercer." The younger nurse lowered her voice after Eve passed. "That her," she whispered. "The new trauma attending." "Yeah," Marcy murmured back. "The one from the Navy. She looks like she should be starting residency." Marcy shrugged. "Guess they come smaller these days." Eve heard them. The words slid along her back like cold water familiar. She kept walking. At the end of the hall, a glass door led to the trauma wing. Light from overhead spilled in a hard rectangle on the floor, a clear border between quiet and chaos. She paused at the threshold for half a breath, then pushed through. In Trauma Bay 3, a teenager with a broken arm was trying not to cry. He sat on the gurney, jaw set tight. Knuckles white around a foam stress ball. His mother hovered near the curtain, eyes darting between monitors and staff. Eve stepped in, glanced at the x-ray hung on the monitor, then at his face. "Hey," she said. "I am Dr. Mercer. You like baseball?" He blinked. "Yeah." "Good. You are going to need that arm. Let us make sure it works." She examined the fracture, gave a quick set of instructions, ordered sedation and reduction, and worked without fuss. Her hands moved with casual precision, fingers sure and economical. The boy watched her for as long as the meds allowed, then drifted off. His heart rate settled. His mother stared. "Your hand does not shake at all," she said quietly, "even when you push the bone." Eve taped the splint-checked cap refill. "That is my job," she replied. "You can do the worrying." She stepped out of the curtain and into the hallway light. An hour later, she was standing in front of a different door, one without windows. "Chief of Trauma," the placard read, "H. Klein, M.D." She knocked once. "Come in." The office inside smelled like old coffee and printer ink. File boxes lined the walls, overflowing with charts and forms. Behind the desk, Dr. Harris Klein looked up over his glasses, gray hair, slicked back tie already askew. He held a thin manila folder. "Dr. Mercer," he said. "Mercer," he said. "Sit." She sat. He flipped the folder open. Several pages inside were stamped with block letters. Large sections were blacked out, inked over until the words became thick bars. Klein poked one of the redacted lines with his pen. "This," he said, "is not what I call a transparent work history." Eve kept her gaze level. "Those sections are classified, sir. Special operations. It was not my choice." "So I have been told," he said, "by a very nervous man at the Department of Defense." He sighed, leaned back in his chair. "Here is my problem, Dr. Mercer. This is not a forward surgical unit. This is a level 1 civilian trauma center with lawyers in every shadow. You are young, you look younger, and your resume reads like a conspiracy theory." He waited. Silence stretched between them. "I am not hiring a story," he added. "I am hiring a surgeon." Eve folded her hands in her lap to keep from fidgeting. "I understand." "Do you?" Klein asked. "Because I have seen young hotshots crash and burn in this building. They come with decorated pasts and big reputations, and then they cut the wrong artery because they think adrenaline is the same as experience." "I do not need my past to speak for me," she said. "You will see my work." Klein studied her face. His gaze drifted for half a second to her right forearm, where her scrub sleeve ended just short of her elbow. Beneath the thin cotton, the faintest suggestion of dark ink traced a line along her skin. He blinked and looked back up. "You will be on nights for the first month," he said. "Anything complicated, you loop me in, understood?" "Yes, sir." "Go save somebody," he said, "and try not to get this place sued." She stood, nodded once, and walked out. The first month blurred. Night after night, Pacific Mercy felt like its own small planet. The city slept. The hospital did not. Under the fluorescent glow, time thinned out into a series of rooms and alarms. Eve lived in the on-call room more than in her apartment. A narrow bed, a metal locker, a window that faced the helipad. She lined her shoes neatly under the frame, folded an extra blanket, set her phone and pager side by side on the table like two small grenades. Sometimes, just as she closed her eyes, rotors thumped overhead. The sound pressed through concrete and bone. For a moment, the mattress would tilt, the room would smell like dust and hot metal and something burning far away. Her fingers curled against the sheet. She would open her eyes, stare at the cracked ceiling, and wait until the vibrations faded. Then the pager would buzz and she would stand up. An elderly woman with a hip fracture, a bartender with glass in his palm, a cyclist whose face had met asphalt. Eve moved from case to case, quiet and efficient. She did not raise her voice. She did not waste words. Marcy watched her work and shook her head more than once. "You come out of nowhere, kid," the nurse muttered one night as Eve closed a neat line of sutures on a scalp laceration. "But those hands know what they are doing." Eve wiped the last of the blood away, checked the wound. "That is the goal," she said, "so the rest of me can stay out of the way." In the breaks between codes when the trauma bay lights dimmed and the beeping slowed, Eve sat at a computer terminal and finished notes. Her shoulders rounded, her eyes burned, but her wrists kept moving, signing orders and prescriptions. The others complained about nights. She volunteered for more. People noticed. They noticed how she seemed to appear exactly where she was needed, then vanish. How she was always listed on the most complicated cases no one wanted. How she rarely left the hospital before the sun came up. They whispered, "She is trying to impress Klein. She is hiding from something. She's just gunning for a big case." None of it mattered when the trauma doors slammed open. 2 weeks into her rotation, a paramedic burst through those doors with a young woman on the gurney, blood slicking her hair. Car crash on the freeway, no time to call Klein. Eve stepped into the rectangle of bright light, snapped on gloves, and moved. By the time dawn finally slipped through the narrow windows of the trauma hall, her scrubs were stiff with dried blood. She stood in the doorway, watching the sky lighten, the hospital hum behind her. A janitor pushing a mop paused as he passed. "Long night, Doc?" Eve flexed her fingers, felt the ache in the small joints. She glanced down at the edge of her sleeve. A spot of red had soaked through and kissed the skin near her elbow, right where dark ink hid beneath cloth. "Something like that," she said. She pulled the sleeve down a little and walked back into the light. The freeway did not care that it was 3 a.m. Rain had come in thin sheets over the city, just enough to slick the asphalt and blur the headlights. From the trauma bay windows, the freeway looked like a river of smeared light under the overpass. "Trauma coming in, mate," the charge nurse called. "High-speed rollover, ETA 2 minutes. The quiet in the hall stiffened. Eve rinsed her hands at the scrub sink, the smell of antiseptic rising around her. Water dripped from her elbows onto the tile. She watched the drops fall, then shut off the faucet and dried her hands. Marcy stepped up beside her. "You get any sleep?" the nurse asked. "A little," Eve answered. Marcy snorted. "Liar." They both turned at the sound of the trauma door sliding open. A paramedic pushed through, voice already elevated. "Male late 20s, ghost," he called. "High-speed MVA, unrestrained, found thrown from vehicle. Hypotensive en route, abdominal distension guarding. Possible spleen, maybe liver, lost pulses twice in the rig." The man on the gurney was pale under the blood and road grit. His shirt was cut open, his abdomen rising hard and tight under the straps. His eyes stared at the ceiling, unfocused. A senior surgeon, Dr. Patel, stepped in, pulling on gloves. "Get him to CT," Patel said. "I want a scan before we start guessing." "We do not have time for a tour," the paramedic shot back. "His pressure tanked twice. He needs a belly open now." "Scan then, or—" Patel repeated more to himself than anyone. Eve was already at the bedside. She pressed her fingers into the man's abdomen, felt the rigid swelling, the slight give under her palm that did not belong. "Name?" she asked. "Jason," the paramedic said. He was conscious for about 30 seconds. "Jason Sig?" Eve said, leaning close. "Can you hear me?" His gaze flickered. His lips moved. No sound came out. His blood pressure on the monitor dipped another notch. Marcy looked at Eve, just a flick of the eyes. Eve straightened. "Prep the OR, she said. "We open here if we have to." Patel turned. "Excuse me." "His spleen is gone," Eve replied calmly. "Maybe more. We are not walking him around the building while he bleeds into his own abdomen." Patel frowned. "We do not cut without imaging." "We do when the imaging is going to be a mortuary photo." The words hung in the air. A respiratory therapist cleared his throat quietly. Someone opened a cabinet a little too fast. Patel hesitated. His hands tugged at his gloves, buying time. Eve did not wait. "Marcy, call for O negative and type and cross," she said. "Get vascular sets ready. We are moving now." She met Patel's eyes. "You can scrub in with me or sign the death certificate." For a heartbeat, Patel looked like he might argue. Then the monitor beeped in a frantic high pitch and the choice made itself. "Fine," he muttered. "Or two, move." They rolled Jason down the hall floor, slick from the rain tracked in on gurney wheels. The fluorescent lights above flashed rhythmically across his face. As they passed from fixture to fixture, each doorway spilled a square of harsher light across the floor. Eve walked at his shoulder, one hand on the rail, watching his chest rise. The OR greeted them with cold air and bright lamps. "All right, people, this is going to be quick and messy," Patel announced. "Let us keep it neat." He took his place at the head of the table. Eve did not correct him when the first request came from her mouth instead of his. "Scalpel," she said. The instrument slapped into her palm. The metal felt cool, then warmed instantly against her glove. She made a clean incision, felt the resistance of skin and fascia, the sudden give as she entered the cavity. Heat and the rich smell of blood rose in a wave. The suction roared to life, hungry. "Lapse, retractor." Her voice was calm even. The room seemed to shrink until it was just her, the field, and the sound of the monitor. She traced the source of the pooling blood fingers, moving fast but deliberate. "Here," she murmured. "Halum, clamps." Patel watched over the retractor breath a little too quick. "I have got proximal," he said. "You are a little high," she answered without looking. "Drop 2 millimeters. Respect the artery." He adjusted. The bleeding slowed. "Good," she said. They worked in a tight, focused rhythm. The anesthesiologist called out numbers. Marcy anticipated each request half a second before it left Eve's mouth. The suction kept singing. Then, gradually, the monitor began to calm. The wild spikes settled into a steady pattern. The red on the suction line faded to a slow, rhythmic slide. Eve placed the last tie, checked for leaks, then began to close. 90 minutes later, Jason lay under a clean dressing, his abdomen neatly sutured. His skin had regained a hint of color. His chest rose in slow, even breaths. Patel pulled his mask down, eyes still wide. "You have done a lot of these," he said. "A few," Eve answered. In the recovery room, Jason stirred under sedation, his eyelashes fluttering. Eve checked his vitals one more time, then turned to leave. His sister, who had been pacing the hallway, stepped forward. "Doctor," she said, voice small. "Is he going to be okay?" "He is stable," Eve replied. "He lost a lot of blood, but we stopped the bleeding. The next 24 hours are important. For now, he is alive." The woman's shoulder sagged. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Your hands," she said, after a moment, eyes shining. "They never shook, not once." Eve glanced at her own fingers, red where the gloves had rubbed. "There is enough trembling in the waiting room," she said softly. "Someone should hold still." She stepped around the woman and walked back into the corridor. Later that night in the staff lounge, a resident named Finley dropped into the chair across from her, a sandwich still wrapped in his hands. "You made Patel look like a med student," he said, half admiring, half nervous. "I did not make him do anything," Eve said. Finley leaned forward. "Where were you stationed?" Vailly asked. "People keep saying the Navy, like it is a complete sentence." Eve picked up her coffee, now cold, and swirled it once before answering. "A few different places," she said. "None with good coffee." "Combat zones," Finley pressed. She looked at him over the rim of the cup. His eyes were bright with curiosity and bravado, the kind that comes from never having been shelled by anything more than an attending's voice. "Bad places," she said. He waited for more. None came. An overhead announcement crackled to life, pulling him away. When he left, Marcy slid into his spot. "You know they are all making up their own versions, the nurse said. "About where you came from." "Most stories are more interesting than the paperwork," Eve replied. Marcy studied her face. "You sleep at all after that freeway case?" she asked. "A bit." Another snort. "Liar." When Eve finally made it back to the on-call room, the sky outside the small window was the color of steel. The helipad sat empty, its lights dimmed. She toed off her shoes, lay down without bothering to pull the blanket over herself. For a few seconds there was nothing but the hum of the vent and the distant squeak of a cart. Then, beneath it, a faint vibration. The first rotor beat arrived like a memory. The sound built slowly through the ceiling, a low, insistent thrum. Not loud, not yet, but enough. Her throat tightened, the air in the room thickened. For a heartbeat she smelled dust hot and dry instead of disinfectant. The hum of the vent became the whine of a distant engine. Somewhere in another life, someone shouted for a medic. Her fingers curled in the thin hospital blanket. She focused on the window. The glass rattled gently in its frame as the helicopter settled on the roof. She watched the faint shift of shadows on the wall until the rotors began to slow and the vibrations faded back into the ordinary hum of the building. Her breathing eased. The pager went off. She sat up, slipped her shoes back on, and headed for the door. In the trauma bay, another gurney was already rolling in. Another set of eyes wide with fear. Another square of hard light spilling from an open doorway. People shifted instinctively toward Dr. Klein as he walked in. He scanned the room, then saw Eve. "You are on this one," he said. "You have got the hands for it." There was something new in his voice. Not warmth, not yet, but less skepticism, more weight. Eve pulled on fresh gloves. The latex snapped against her wrists. "All right," she said. "Let us work." The days stacked on top of each other until they all felt the same. Codes, sutures, scans, brief flashes of gratitude in waiting rooms, long hours of silence in hallways that hummed with recycled air. Then the sky shook. Eve was midway through a consult for a broken ankle when the windows trembled. The patient looked up, startled. The fluorescent light above their heads quivered. She did not need to see the helicopter to know it was landing. A beat later, the overhead announcement cracked through the noise of the emergency department. "Incoming trauma from Naval Special Warfare. ETA 3 minutes. All trauma staff to Bay 1. The words snapped through the room like a line pulled tight. The nurse beside her, chart in hand, froze. "Special Warfare," he repeated. "That sounds serious." Eve handed the patient off to ortho with a few quick words and moved. In the trauma hallway, people hurried with a different kind of energy. Security stood a little straighter. A hospital administrator appeared near the nurse's station blazer, too sharp for the our eyes already calculating. Marcy tossed Eve a fresh gown. "VIP," the nurse said. "You ready for politics, Doc?" "I am ready for a patient," Eve replied. The trauma doors slid open hard enough to rattle. The blast of outside air carried rotor wash and jet fuel, sharp and oily. 2 Navy medics pushed the gurney in at a near run. "Commander Jack Rourke," the lead medic called, voice clipped. 48, explosive blast near training compound, shrapnel to left thorax and abdomen, intubated in the field, hypotensive tachy, unresponsive to fluids. We have given 6 units. The man on the stretcher was large in a way that did not come from gym mirrors. His chest was broad arms roped with muscle under the torn remains of his uniform. Blood soaked the dressings that wrapped his torso. His face was gray under the oxygen mask. Even unconscious, his presence filled the room. The Navy medic lowered his voice as they transferred the commander to the trauma bed. "He is a legend," he muttered to no one in particular. "You do not want to be the hospital that loses him." The administrator flinched at that. Dr. Klein stepped into the circle around the bed, pulling on gloves. His jaw was set tighter than usual. "All right, Sim," he said. "Let us keep this controlled. Dr. Mercer, you are with me. Marcy, get blood ready. Let us have a chest x-ray and a pan scan." They worked through the initial steps with practiced speed. Lines placed, monitors attached, numbers called out. The x-ray tech slid the plate under the commander's back, snapped the image, and hurried it out. Under the mess of bandages, Eve could feel the wrongness. The left side of his chest was too quiet. The abdomen was firm in all the places it should not be. "Chest sounds decreased on the left," she said. "Possible hemothorax, belly is concerning." The commander, sedated but restless, shifted under their hands. His eyes cracked open 2 slits of pale blue. "Where the hell am I?" he rasped through the tube and mask voice, raw even through the plastic. "Pacific Mercy Medical Center, eh?" Klein answered. "You are safe. We are taking care of you." The commander's gaze swept the room and locked on Eve. His brow furrowed. "You, he said, or tried to. The word came out as a scrape. "How old are you?" "Old enough to do my job, I say," she replied. He tried to push up on one elbow. The Navy medic held him down. I am not letting a kid cut me open, Yige, he forced out. Get me a real surgeon. Someone who has seen fire. Someone who has walked point. His heartbeat jumped on the monitor, a jagged ascent. Commander, you need to stay still, Eve said. You are bleeding internally. We are trying to control it. He turned his face away from her toward Klein. Get her away from me, he demanded. Get somebody who knows what it feels like when the ground kicks back. The administrator stepped closer, seizing the opening. Dr. Klein, given the profile of this patient, she began carefully. Perhaps you should take primary and we call in vascular and cardiac to be safe. Klein glanced toward the doorway where a small crowd had started to gather. A few uniforms had appeared, Navy officers with tense shoulders. The X-ray tech returned holding the film. X-ray is up, Kiel, he said. They turned toward the light box. The image flickered into view, a ghostly map of bone and shadow. Near the left side of the spine, a bright shard of metal glared white against the gray. Eve stepped closer. Zoom on that, she said. The tech adjusted the image on the digital screen. The fragment resolved into a jagged piece of shrapnel lodged near the descending aorta, its edge angled just wrong. Eve watched the live fluoroscopy feed from the portable unit, the way the metal seemed to tremble in sync with the heartbeat. It is moving, she said quietly. Klein frowned. What? With every contraction, she answered. It is chewing through the wall. If it cuts through the aorta, he will empty out before we can even get the clamps. The anesthesiologist called out, pressure dropping, 80/40, heart rate rising. We need vascular in here now, the administrator said sharply. We are not opening a legend like this without full clearance. It will not matter who is in the room if we waste 5 minutes arguing, Eve replied, eyes still on the screen. We need to move him to the OR this second and open his chest or his abdomen depending on what we find first. Klein spoke low, close to her ear. Mercer, his file is probably thicker than yours and mine combined, he said. If he dies, this hospital burns. If he dies because we stood here worrying about that, we deserve it, she answered. The commander's hand twitched, fingers snagging the edge of the sheet. Someone who has been there, he muttered through cracked lips. Someone who knows what it means when there is no backup. The room waited. Eve felt every eye on her, every fear and expectation twisting into the same knot. She felt the thin cotton of her scrub sleeve against her skin, warm with her own blood from a nick earlier in the shift. She thought of dust and heat and a sky bruised with smoke. Her heart beat once hard. She reached up and took hold of her sleeve. Commander Rourke, she said, voice steady. Look at me. He turned toward her, slow, reluctant. His gaze flicked up and down, measuring, skeptical. She drew the sleeve past her elbow. The ink stood out against her pale skin, dark and sharp. The trident of naval special warfare, wrapped with the caduceus of a medic, marked in lines that had once been crisp and were now softened slightly by time. It sat there above the veins of her forearm, a small flag of service that did not wash off. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with machines. Marcy whispered, barely audible, "Holy God, that is Team Inc." One of the Navy medics sucked in a breath. "Special Warfare Combat Medic, Ian," he said. "Sir, that is our insignia." Rourke stared. His eyes widened focus, sharpening through the haze of pain and drugs. "You, he said again, but the word was different now. "Mercer." She inclined her head a fraction. "Yes, Commander." His face changed. The anger dropped out, leaving something rawer. "We were told you were gone," he rasped. "Ashfall took you. They said you never made it out of the valley." Eve held his gaze. "Rumors travel faster than helicopters," she said. "You are bleeding into your chest and your abdomen. If you want to live, you need to let me operate." He swallowed once. The monitor beeped its restless rhythm beside him. "You have walked point, he said. "More times than I wanted to," she answered. A ghost of a smile touched one corner of his mouth. "My life is in your hands, Doc," he said. "Take the shot." The consent was not written, but it was clear. Eve turned to the team. "We are moving to the OR now, Gifoye," she said. "Marcy, call for massive transfusion protocol. Get every unit of O negative they can spare. Patel, I need you on exposure. Klein, you will assist. Admin, either get out of the doorway or start calling the blood bank. There was no room in her tone for debate. They rolled Rourke down the hall. The wheels rattled over the seams in the floor, the sound fast and jittery. Fluorescent fixtures slid overhead, each one throwing a new rectangle of light across his face. His dog tags clinked softly against his collar. At the OR, doors the scrub nurse pushed with her back, swinging them open to a flood of cold light. Inside, the table waited. Eve scrubbed quickly at the sink, eyes on the clock. The water pounded against her arms, splashing droplets that ran down over the ink on her skin. The green soap smelled harsh and clean. Klein stood beside her, hands already lifted. "You never told me," he said. "It did not change the fact that I was new to this hospital," she replied. "It changes a lot of things," he said quietly. She shut off the water, shook her hands once. "Not for him," she said. "Not right now." In the center of the room, under the lights, Rourke lay draped and ready. The anesthesiologist nodded once. "He is hanging on," he said. "For now." Eve walked to the table, the overhead lamps throwing hard white halos on the sterile field. The air felt cooler in here, almost thin. She held out her hand. "Scalpel." The metal dropped into her palm like an answer. Her other hand curled briefly unconsciously near the ink on her arm. Then her focus narrowed to the incision line, to the heartbeat on the monitor, to the first cut that separated life from whatever waited on the other side of the door. The first cut went in smooth. Eve opened the commander's abdomen with a single clean line, enough to let the pressure out without wasting motion. Blood surged up to meet her, hot and dark. The smell of iron and cautery filled the air. "Suction," she said. The tube slid into the field. The red lake thinned, revealing glistening loops of bowel and the shadowed curve of the spleen. "There," she said. "Left upper quadrant. He is blowing out behind the stomach. Retract." Marcy leaned on the retractor, the tissue pulled back. Eve slid her hand and fingers, disappearing into the cavity until only her wrist and the ink above it remained visible. She palpated carefully, feeling for the jagged edge she had seen on the screen. Her fingertips scraped metal. "Found it," she said. "Clamps ready. Klein, I need you here." He moved in opposite her, eyes flicking between the bloody field and the monitor. "Pressure is 60/30, the anesthesiologist warned. "He is circling the drain." "Clamp proximal," Eve said. "Now." Klein fumbled for the right angle. She guided his hand with a nod. "Lower there." Her voice did not rise. "Lock it." The clamp snapped shut. The pulsing fountain eased to a steady ooze. "Distal," she said. "Then we clear the fragment." The shard came free with a wet scrape. It clinked softly into the metal basin, no heavier than any other piece of steel that had ever tried to kill someone. They worked in a narrow tunnel of light. Outside that circle, the room fell away. Eve closed the torn vessel in small exact stitches, each one the same distance from the last. Her world shrank to needle thread and the faint tremor she could feel against her glove as the commander's heart pounded through what was left of his vascular tree. The monitor tone climbed, then steadied. 85/50, the anesthesiologist called. "Coming up?" Eve did not smile. She checked her repair twice, pressed gauze along the line, waited to see if any new bloom of red appeared. Nothing did. "Pack the upper quadrant," she said. "We will close in layers. We can reassess the chest once he is more stable." For the first time, she let herself exhale. 90 minutes after the first cut, Commander Jack Rourke left the operating room alive. Eve watched as they wheeled him toward the elevator, his face slack with sedation, the tubes and lines trailing like extra veins. His dog tags had been tucked away. His uniform was gone. In the hospital gown, he looked like any other patient, except he was not. Klein peeled off his gloves beside her, hands still trembling. "You ran that table," he said quietly. "I did my job," she answered. He studied the ink on her forearm, now streaked with drying blood, then looked away. In the scrub room alone, she held her arm under the water until the last of the red swirled down the drain and only the dark Trident remained on her skin. Several hours later, the ICU hummed with its own soft machinery. Monitors beeped in overlapping rhythms, ventilators sighed, pumps clicked in tiny mechanical heartbeats. Rourke lay in a glass-walled room connected to lines that fed and measured and drained. His chest rose and fell with the ventilator. A thin line of stubble shadowed his jaw. Eve stood just inside the door, arms folded loosely, eyes on the numbers above his head. Stable. Barely but stable. He stirred. The nurse at his bedside leaned in. "Commander," she said, "if you can hear me, try to open your eyes." His eyelids fluttered, then lifted. The gaze that emerged was glassy but present. "You have company," the nurse added. "I will give you 2 a minute." She nodded at Eve as she left. Rourke focused slowly. When he recognized her, something shifted in his expression. "Doc," he said. His voice was rough sand scraped across stone. Commander, she replied, you made it through. He tried to swallow and winced. Feels like I lost a wrestling match with a truck. You lost a disagreement with an explosion, she said. The truck would have been kinder. A ghost of a laugh shook his chest, then turned into a sharp breath. Easy, she said. Your insides are held together with more thread than you want to know about. He studied her for a long moment, eyes searching. They called it ashfall, he said, back then, the mission. The word pulled the air out of the room for a heartbeat. Yes, she said. We dropped into a valley that smelled like burned tires. He went on. His gaze turned toward the ceiling now as if the story played there. Secondary blast took out half the compound. We were trying to pull a kid out. You covered him. You remember that? Eve hesitated. I remember being between someone and the noise, she said. Then I remember nothing for a long time. We saw the wall take you, Rourke said. Head first. Blood everywhere. The roof was coming down. The enemy was closing. Command in our ears saying we had 15 seconds to move or be pinned. I argued. My team argued. But we could not reach you. They ordered us out. His hand clenched and unclenched against the sheet. They told us you were MIA, presumed KIA, he said. We left that valley believing we had left you under it. He blinked hard. I signed off on that report, he added. I signed your death. Eve listened, her own hand still. The machines filled the pauses between his sentences. When did you find out they were wrong, she asked. 6 months later, he said. A classified briefing, small room, too much coffee. They said our medic had walked into a border clinic with no ID and a head injury. They said she spoke 3 languages like they were scrambled eggs. They said she fixed half the village and could not tell them her own name. He turned his head to look at her again. I kept that file open on my desk for 2 years, Vashti said. Every time we shipped out, it stared at me, redacted lines and all. Eve looked down at the rail of the bed. Her reflection, faint and distorted, looked back at her from the polished metal. I woke up in concrete, she said softly. A bare room with 1 window and a cot. A woman sat next to me with a bowl of water and a boy with a bandaged leg. I knew which stitches to change and which meds to give. I did not know what to call myself. She traced a line on the rail with her thumb. They kept me alive because I kept them alive, she said. Eventually someone walked me over a border. An embassy figured out the rest. The headaches stopped. The memories came back in pieces. The file did not get less read. Rourke swallowed. Why are you here? He asked. Not back with the team. She thought of helicopters and valleys and the way dust tasted when it settled in your teeth. Because I did not want my entire life to be one long extraction under fire, she said. Because some of us have to stand where the casualties land, not where they fall. His eyes softened. I looked for you, he said. Every angle I could. Not just to ease my own conscience. The team broke a little when we thought we had abandoned our medic. We needed to know you were not a ghost we left behind. In some ways I was, she replied. Parts of me stayed there. A tear slid sideways from the corner of her eye, catching on her cheekbone. She did not wipe it away. Rourke watched it travel. They gave you anything for what you pulled off back there, he asked. She shook her head. They gave me a stack of forms and a choice, stay in or get out. I chose this. He nodded as much as the tubes allowed. Then they owe you, he said, and so does this place. Outside the glass, the hospital moved around them. Nurses walked by pushing carts. A resident checked a chart, yawning. Life flowed past the little ICU room, unaware of the gravity inside it. By afternoon, the quiet intimacy of the ICU had been replaced by the muffled formality of the boardroom. Eve sat in a chair that was slightly too low for the long table. The walls were beige and hung with framed photos of donors and groundbreakings. A pitcher of water sweated on a tray. The view from the window showed the bay in bright daylight. Across from her, a row of serious faces watched. Linda Cho sat near the center, a neat stack of papers in front of her. Her expression was professionally sympathetic, her posture rigid. Dr. Mercer, she began, we appreciate your time. The events of last night have raised serious concerns for the hospital. Eve clasped her hands loosely in her lap. Linda slid one document forward. You initiated emergent surgery on a high-profile patient without documented consent, without prior sign-off from department leadership, and without consulting the on-call vascular team, she said. Your official civilian experience is limited. Your military file is incomplete and heavily redacted. These factors leave us exposed. Exposed to what? Eve asked. To liability, one of the board members answered. To public scrutiny, to legal action. If Commander Rourke had died on your table, this hospital would be on every news channel in the country. He did not die, Eve said. That is not the point, Linda replied. You violated protocol. Eve let the word hang for a moment. I responded to an actively moving fragment threatening his aorta. she said. Waiting for another signature would have killed him. You cannot know that, another board member said. I do know that, she answered. That is why they trained me. That is why they gave me this. She lifted her forearm a fraction. The sleeve had been rolled down, but the shape under the fabric was unmistakable. Linda's mouth tightened. Regardless, the administrator said, the board must enforce standards that protect this institution. Effective immediately, we are considering suspension of your surgical privileges pending a full review. So you can tell the next family that their father bled out while the paperwork loaded, Eve said quietly. The room shifted at that. No one met her eyes for a second. We are not here to debate philosophy, Linda said. We are here to decide policy. She raised her pen. Before she could speak again, the double doors at the end of the room opened. Commander Rourke walked in. He wore his dress whites, the fabric pressed to sharp lines. A cane tapped once with each step, but his posture was resolute. Behind him came a man in an admiral's uniform and another in a dark suit with a leather briefcase. Every person at the table straightened. Commander, Linda said, half standing, you should be in recovery. I am recovering, Fikil, he said. His voice filled the room without effort. Here. He moved to the end of the table. The admiral and the man with the briefcase took positions to either side of him. Is this the part where you fire the doctor who kept my heart beating? Rourke asked. Because I did not want to miss that. A few of the board members shifted, suddenly fascinated by their own notes. Linda cleared her throat. We are conducting a standard review of protocol adherence, she said. Nothing has been decided. Rourke placed a small velvet box on the polished wood. The hinge clicked as he opened it. Inside, a bronze medal gleamed against the dark lining, a tiny V carved below the ribbon bar. This is a bronze star for valor, he said. It was signed off 3 years ago for actions during Operation Ashfall. It has been sitting in a drawer because they were not sure she was alive to receive it. He nodded toward Eve. A ripple went through the room. Rourke looked at each board member in turn. She saved 3 operators that night under active fire, he said. Yesterday she added 1 broken old commander in a hospital that almost talked itself into letting him die. The man with the briefcase stepped forward and set a red-bordered envelope on the table. I am Lieutenant Commander Hall Judge, Advocate General's Corps, he said. This is a memorandum from the Department of Defense regarding Dr. Evelyn Mercer. Linda picked it up with careful fingers as if it might burn. Dr. Mercer currently operates under Special Operations Medical Authority Code Iron 7, Hall said. Under this code, she is granted standing authorization to initiate life-saving surgical interventions in emergent circumstances without prior civilian approval in both military and civilian settings. This authority supersedes local protocol in cases where delay constitutes a direct threat to life. Silence settled over the table like a new layer of dust. So, one board member said slowly, you are saying she outranks us in an emergency. In practical terms, when seconds matter, yes, Hall replied. Linda's face had gone pale. We are, of course, committed to supporting all federal guidelines, she said quickly. Our only concern has been alignment. Rourke looked at Eve. Her only concern was that my blood stayed inside my body, he said. I suggest you adjust your alignment. Eve sat very still. I do not need a medal, she said softly. She reached out and closed the box with 2 fingers. I do not need a title, she added. I need the freedom to do what I have been trained to do when someone is dying in front of me, and there is no time to call a meeting. Klein, who had been quiet in a chair along the wall, spoke up. She is right, he said. We have been letting rank outrun skill for years. Maybe it is time we flip that. Several heads turned toward him. We can formalize a guideline, he went on. An internal directive. When there is a critical 3-minute window, the physician with the right expertise takes lead regardless of seniority. We build our paperwork around that, not the other way around. Linda took a breath, then another. We will need to review the legal implications, she said. You will, Rourke said. I already have. He tapped the envelope. Code Iron 7 covers her too, he added. The rest is your conscience. For the first time since she had entered the room, Eve felt the knot between her shoulder blades begin to loosen. The board members murmured, shuffling papers that suddenly seemed less important. No formal vote was taken, not yet, but the energy had shifted. The threat in the room no longer pointed at her. As the meeting broke and people began to stand, Linda stepped closer. Dr. Mercer, she said, we will revisit this with you once we have integrated the new information. Eve looked at her. I will be in the trauma bay, she said. You know where to find me. She left the boardroom and stepped back into the brighter light of the main corridor. The sounds of the hospital washed over her again. Monitors, voices, the faint distant echo of rotors turning above the roof. She rolled her sleeve back down over the ink and started toward the elevators. The memo came down 2 weeks later. It did not look dramatic, Just a few paragraphs in clinical fonts sent to every department inbox and posted on the trauma board between a CPR course flyer and a reminder about hand washing. Title: Emergent Intervention Guideline. Subtitle: Informal Label in Use, Mercer Directive. Eve read it while standing at the nurse's station, coffee cooling in her hand. In cases where a critical 3-minute window is identified, the attending physician with the most relevant expertise will assume immediate lead regardless of seniority, with authority to initiate life-saving intervention without prior administrative approval. Documentation and notifications will follow as soon as feasible. Someone had added in pen at the bottom, small and neat: when in doubt, save the patient. Marcy leaned over her shoulder. "Look at you, Doc," she said, "getting your own guideline." "It is a directive," Eve said, "not mine." "Sure," Marcy replied. "You just happen to match the name." The first real test came before anyone had time to argue about it. A teenager arrived after a skate park fall, neck twisted wrong, breathing shallow. The senior spine surgeon was across town. The resident on call froze at the sight of the MRI, eyes wide as the scan crawled across the screen. Eve stepped in, read the image twice, then looked at the clock. "We have 2 minutes before the swelling gets ahead of us," she said. "Neuro, you are on this. You did your fellowship in cervical stabilization. Take lead." The young neurologist blinked. "Me," he said. "Dr. Klein is not here." "You are," she said. "You have the hands. We follow you." He swallowed, then straightened. The procedure went smoothly. The boy woke up later with all 4 limbs moving. Word started to move through the building in small, quiet currents. In a staff meeting, the first open complaint arrived. "We are creating chaos," an older surgeon said, tie loosened, face flushed. "We cannot have residents and junior attendings grabbing complex cases because they feel inspired. There is a reason hierarchy exists." Klein stood at the front of the room, hand on the projector remote. Behind him, a slide showed work scans from that first night. "We let Dr. Mercer break the hierarchy," he said. "I'm glad we did." "She had special authority from the Pentagon," the surgeon shot back. "Are you extending that to every kid with a stethoscope and a hero complex?" "No," Klein said. "I'm extending it to people who can justify their decision when a life is draining away in front of them." He clicked to the next slide. A chart appeared, lines in different colors. "In the last month," he said, "since we started informally applying this guideline, our survival rate for penetrating trauma has climbed 10 points. That is not inspiration, that is numbers." The room shifted. The complaints did not stop, but they softened. Out on the floor, the directive did not live in slides. It lived in looks and nods, in the way people stepped aside when the right person moved toward the table, regardless of the name on their badge. One afternoon, the hospital got louder. Eve walked past the simulation lab and heard shouting, but not the panicked sort. A sharp, controlled sound, commands, responses. She paused at the window. Inside, the room had been transformed into something that looked almost like a small battlefield. Mannequins lay on stretchers with fake blood smeared across plastic skin. Smoked glass obscured the lights. A recording of distant sirens and helicopter rotors played on a loop. Commander Rourke stood near the center, no cane this time, just a faint stiffness in his stance. He wore fatigues, sleeves, rolled-up scars visible on his forearms. A group of residents and nurses clustered around a simulation gurney. One mannequin had a chest wound, another a missing leg, another an airway blocked with foam. The noise was intentional, overwhelming. Rourke raised his voice over it. "Check your priorities," he called. "You do not get extra points for panicking. Who is dying the fastest? Who can you actually save?" Leo Park was among them, face-pale gloves, trembling slightly. He pressed his hands on the chest of the mannequin with the foam airway counting compressions aloud. His voice cracked, but he kept going. Rourke let the scenario play out, then called a halt. "Freeze," he said. Everyone stopped. The fake alarms kept sounding for a moment before the tech cut them. Rourke pointed at Leo. "What did you see first?" he asked. "Heaviest leg," Leo said. "A lot of blood. It looked bad." "How long does it take to bleed out from that versus not breathing at all?" Rourke asked. Leo swallowed. "The airway goes first." "So, next time," Rourke said, "your eyes go there first. Your fear can stare at the leg on its own time." He turned toward the control booth. "Run it again," he said. He said. The rotor started up on the speakers. The sirens wailed. Eve slipped into the room while they reset, standing at the back with her arms folded. Rourke noticed her and gave a small nod. "You letting them scare you on purpose?" she said quietly when he moved to stand beside her. "Better in here than out there," he replied. "You told me that, remember." She watched Leo take his position again, jaw set, eyes a little steadier. "How is the directive playing with your people?" she asked. "They like things that work," Rourke said. "They do not care whose name is on the door." He studied her profile. How is it playing with yours? He added. They are adjusting, she said, some faster than others. You cannot train instinct, he said. You can only train what people do with it. She glanced at him. That is almost profound for someone who once tried to fire me before I ever touched a scalpel, she said. He smiled small but real. I did not try to fire you, he said. I tried to fire the kid I thought you were. You were not the only one. Later that week in the trauma bay, the directive showed itself in a simpler form. A middle-aged woman arrived with a stab wound to the neck. Blood soaked the collar of her blouse bright against the floral print. She clutched at the wound, eyes wild. 2 surgeons hovered, each half stepping toward the gurney, then looking at the other. Eve turned to the quietest person in the room, a small ENT attending with dark circles under her eyes. You have done more neck explorations than anyone here, Eve said. You take lead. The ENT blinked. Are you sure? She asked. Yes, Eve said. I will back you. Go. There was no precedential memo for that. There did not need to be. Afterward, when the woman was awake and talking, hand pressed to a fresh bandage instead of a widening hole, the ENT found Eve in the hallway. They would not have let me near that case a year ago, she said. They were wrong a year ago, Eve replied. The days took on a new rhythm. Less waiting for approvals, more focused action. It did not erase the conflicts. There were arguments and bruised egos after action reviews that turned sharp. There were still losses. But there were also more patients rolling out of the hospital on their own 2 feet instead of under a sheet. In the cafeteria, someone taped a copy of the directive to the soda machine. Underneath in handwriting Eve recognized as Leo's, a note appeared. If you know what you are doing and someone is dying, move. Eve saw it one night as she passed through for a late cup of coffee. She paused, fingertips brushing the edge of the paper. On the far side of the room, Linda Cho sat alone with a tray and a stack of files. Her blazer was off, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. This was not the boardroom version of her, polished and guarded. This woman looked tired. Linda noticed Eve and hesitated, then stood carrying her tray over. Do you mind? She asked. Eve shook her head. They sat there for a moment with the hum of refrigerators and distant voices around them. I saw the latest trauma numbers, Linda said. The board did too. And Eve asked. They are good numbers, Linda said. Very good. The Mercer directive is part of that. Eve took a sip of her coffee. I know I made assumptions about you, Linda added. Most of them were wrong. Most of them were understandable, Eve said. We do not usually hand scalpels to ghosts with classified files. Linda almost smiled. Judgment is easy when you are not the one standing over the open chest, she said. I am trying to remember that. Judgment is heavy when it lands on the wrong person, Eve replied. Help us keep it off the people who are trying to move when seconds count. Linda nodded. I will, she said. I owe you that much. You owe it to them? Eve said, tilting her head toward the general direction of the trauma bay. I am just one set of hands. A call went out over the intercom for a trauma code. Both women glanced instinctively toward the door. Eve stood. You will want to keep backing the directive, she said. It is about to get another test. She set her cup down and walked out of the cafeteria, the sound of her steps folding into the larger heartbeat of the hospital. The storm came in quiet. No thunder, no flashing sky, just a slow thickening of the clouds over the bay and a steady rain that turned the hospital windows into gray sheets. Eve was finishing a chart at the nurses' station when the first call hit. Multi-vehicle collision on Interstate 8, the overhead speaker announced. Mass casualty alert, all trauma staff to intake. The hallway changed. Conversations cut off mid-word. Chairs scraped. Someone dropped a pen and did not bother to pick it up. Leo Park almost ran into her as he came around the corner. His cheeks were flushed eyes too bright. They just paged everyone beside Ishikushis, he said. EMS is saying at least 8 incoming. Maybe more. There are kids. They said there are kids. His hand shook, not much but enough. Eve stepped aside away from the flow of people moving toward the trauma bays. Leo, she said. He stopped, swallowing hard. The sound of distant sirens slid in under the hum of the lights. I do not know if I can do this, he said quietly. Every time it gets loud, my head goes empty. I know what to do right now, talking to you, but in there, it all just falls out of my hands. Eve watched his breath, fast, shallow. She nodded toward a narrow stretch of wall between 2 doors. Come here, she said. He hesitated, glancing toward the trauma entrance where the automatic doors were already opening and closing as gurneys and staff moved through. We have 30 seconds, she said. Use them. He stepped into the quietest corner they could find. Look at me, she said. He did. Your brain is doing what it was wired to do when something looks like danger, she said. It is emptying out the small stuff so it can scream about alarms. We are going to give it a job instead. Her voice stayed level, unhurried. 3-second reset, she said. Right here, right now. He frowned. What is that? He asked. It is how you steal control back from the part of you that just wants to run, she said. You stop, you take one breath, then you name 3 things you can see, 3 sounds you can hear, 3 textures you can feel out loud. He opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again. In English, Leo, she said, now. He pulled in a breath that hitched in the middle. Exit sign, he said, eyes flicking up. Your badge, the clock. Good, she said. Keep going. Sirens, he said. People talking, the vent. His shoulders dropped half an inch. One more, she said. 3 things you can feel. He pressed his fingers together. Gloves, fur, he said. They are tight on my skin. He shifted his feet. Floor under my shoes. He swallowed. Heartbeat, he said, in my throat. Eve watched his face as he spoke the last word. The wildness in his eyes receded a little. Color returned to his cheeks. For those 3 seconds, she said, you were not a scared doctor in a hallway. You were an information collector. You can always be that person, even when it is loud. He nodded slowly. You will still be afraid, she said. So am I. Fear is allowed. Freezing is not. When you feel it coming, you do this again. 3 seconds. 3 things. Then you move your hands. Leo looked toward the trauma doors. Why did they make you chief? He asked suddenly. She blinked, surprised by the question. Because I know what to do when it gets loud, she said. And I know how to keep moving when I lose someone. That is all. The first ambulance siren climbed the ramp. Eve touched his shoulder, firm and brief. Time is up, she said. Go be useful. He drew in one more steady breath. 3 lights, he murmured. 2 voices, 1 heartbeat. Then he turned and ran toward the chaos. Eve followed. The trauma bays overflowed with motion. Gurneys lined up 3 deep. Wet footprints stamped the floor where rain-slick shoes had passed. The smell of gasoline and blood and cold air fought with the antiseptic. Rourke appeared at some point, leaning against a doorframe with his cane, watching the organized scramble with an appraising eye. Someone had called him when the first report came in. Old habits did not retire easily. He met Eve's gaze for a moment as she moved past with a chart. They are holding it together, he said. They are using what you taught them, she replied. And what you taught them, he said. There was no time for more. They went back to work. Hours later, the adrenaline thinned. The last of the collision patients settled into beds or went upstairs. The floor crews mopped and wiped and replaced linen. The trauma bay lights dimmed to their usual harsh instead of their earlier blinding. Eve finished dictating the final note on a girl with a broken pelvis and a concussion. The girl's parents had already fallen asleep in the chairs at her bedside, fingers still twined around their daughter's wrist. When Eve stepped out of the room, the clock on the wall read almost midnight. She took the stairs to the roof. The door to the helipad creaked when she pushed it open. The rain had stopped. The air smelled wet and clean with a hint of engine oil lingering like a memory. San Diego spread out below in patches of gold and red. The freeway lights crawled slowly along the dark ground. Rourke stood near the edge of the roof, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. The cane rested against the low wall. He turned when he heard the door. You look worse than I did after surgery, he said. You complained more, she replied. He smiled. They stood side by side, watching a helicopter approach from the distance, its lights small and blinking. The rotors grew louder as it neared, then shifted to a deep, rhythmic thrum as it began its descent. Once that sound had turned her stomach. Tonight it was just another moving part in a machine she understood. Every time I come up here, Rourke said, I remember the first time I saw that ink on your arm. He nodded toward her sleeve. It reminded me I had not trusted ghosts enough, he added. Eve looked down at her forearm. The scrub sleeve had ridden up during the shift. The trident was visible in the cool light lines dark against pale skin. For a long time I kept this covered because it felt like a weight, she said. A record of where I failed. You did not fail, he said. I know that now, she answered. Back then it was easier to believe the worst version of the story. The helicopter settled onto the pad with a gust of air that pulled at their clothes. A crew stepped out, faces shadowed by helmets, then vanished into the stairwell below. You could still come back, you know, Rourke said. Teams always need someone who can cut and command. Eve watched the rotor blades slow their roar, fading into a whisper and then silence. I already came back, she said, just not where anyone expected. She gestured toward the floors below where the trauma bays sat like a beating heart inside the building. They land here now, she said. That is where I am needed. Rourke studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the fine lines near her eyes from too many nights without sleep. Then I will make sure this place keeps your back, he said. Same as any good team would. I know, she said. They stood together a little longer, saying nothing, while the city breathed around them. Eventually, the cold reached through the thin fabric of her scrubs. Eve rubbed her arms, then turned toward the door. I have another case to check on, she said. Of course you do, Rourke replied. Back inside the stairwell felt warmer. Her footsteps echoed off the concrete. Somewhere below, a monitor chimed in a steady, stubborn cadence. On the trauma floor, the lights had been turned down to night mode. Voices were softer. A janitor hummed under his breath as he pushed a cart. Eve walked into the recovery area and spent the next few hours where she belonged, by bedsides, at monitors, reading charts, making small adjustments that meant the difference between a good morning and a bad one. Just before dawn, a pager alert flashed on the desk. Emergent surgical consult, multiple fractures, internal bleeding, or 3. She went. The surgery stretched into hours, a long, meticulous repair of a body that had been hit from too many angles: tendons, vessels, bone. All the fragile things that broke when metal met flesh. By the time she placed the last suture, her shoulders ached and her eyes burned. Sweat dampened the neck of her scrub top. The room smelled like cautery and iodine and the faint tang of her own fatigue. She stripped off her gloves. They came away with a soft snap, fingers leaving them one by one. Underneath her hands were pale creased, a line of redness around her wrists where the latex had pressed. Her right sleeve had ridden up again during the case. The Trident sat in the open, a small piece of ink that had once marked a different kind of battlefield. She did not pull the sleeve down. The anesthesiologist began to disconnect the lines, murmuring to the patient, telling them they had done well even though they could not hear it yet. Overhead, the speakers crackled. "Trauma team to intake," the voice said. "Incoming emergency, all available staff." The words slid into place like something familiar. Eve closed her eyes for a brief breath. She felt the weight in her legs, the dull throb in her lower back, the grit at the corners of her eyes. She also felt the steadiness in her hands. "I am enough for this," she whispered so low, only the room heard her. "Right now, I am exactly enough." She stepped away from the table mask hanging loose around her neck and walked toward the door. The hallway outside was bright after the focused light of the OR. At the far end, the trauma entrance doors opened again, spilling a rectangle of harsh light onto the floor. She moved toward it, the ink on her forearm catching the fluorescent glow. The sound of distant rotors drifted through the building, no longer a threat, just another reminder that somewhere above, life was being carried to the place where she waited. Eve reached the edge of the light and kept going, crossing the threshold into whatever waited, with the same calm steps she had learned in bad places and brought home to this one. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.